Hi everybody, it's Janet and welcome to my channel. I'm here today for Cut Cardstock and I'm going to be making this really adorable card, and it's kind of different because it's very dimensional. It uses 3mm foam and red and green and these adorable reindeer, but I promise you it's not that hard if we just take one step at a time. So let's get started with our project. This is the first card I made, and you can see it's quite thick. This 3mm foam highlights those candy peppermint twists and these cute little reindeers all stacked on top of each other. So let's look at the supplies we're going to use to make this card. First up is a Catherine Pooler cover plate called Peppermint Twist. Then I've got this cute little reindeer stacker set, which is a stamp from Art Impressions, and also the hexagon double stitch dies from Art Impressions. I will use this green cardstock. It's Bonsai from CutCardStock, 80 pound, and also this Habenero, 80 pound cover weight. And both of these cardstocks have the same surface on them. It's just a light pattern, kind of like linen on there. It's real hard to see in the camera, but it is there. I'm also going to use Opulent Opal for the main piece of the card and some 3mm foam. So these are the supplies that we'll use, and I'm going to start by cutting the cover plate backgrounds. I'm going to run this through twice, once just through the cardstock, then I'm going to add a silicone mat and run it through again. What I'm trying to do is get the circles around the twist to appear a little bit more prevalently, and that's the only complaint I really have about this cutting plate from Catherine Pooler is I wish that it did have a stronger suggestion of that circle. But it cut out beautifully, and I'm going to set a few of these stars as they are now separated from that cover plate aside because we're going to use them on the card later. Now this is the 3mm foam, and it cut through that foam like butter. There was no problem at all. I only did one pass, and as you can see, it cut through all those swirly peppermint twists or stars without any problem at all. I was very pleased with that. And I'm going to save all of these stars regardless of whether I use them on this card because I think I could use them underneath other pieces later on instead of double-sided foam. So I'm going to try to use that as much as I can. All right, so now the next step is to just arrange the cardstock above the foam. And because it's 3mm foam, it does stretch a little bit when you run it through the die cutting machine. And so it doesn't match exactly 100% perfectly. So I'm just trying to find a happy medium so that there's just a few places where maybe there's a little bit of the foam showing underneath the cardstock. Keep in mind that I'm going to be putting colored paper behind these openings. So being that both are white, the foam and the cardstock, it's really not going to show too much, but still I want to get it as close as I can. And once I feel like that's in place, I'm going to keep holding it there on one side, lift it up, and then put in the glue underneath so that I can attach it without taking the chance of moving it around and getting it off again. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, as you see. And in some places where it's really obvious that they don't match, I'm using my pick to just push the foam back. And in many cases, that works good enough. It kind of retains wherever I push it, surprisingly. Maybe it's because there's a little glue under there, I'm not sure. But it does stay actually pretty decently. Still, it's not perfect. You can see a little bit of the white foam peeking underneath the white cardstock, but it's not bad. And I'm ready to move on, so I'm going to cut some of this red habanero, and I'm also going to cut some green bonsai in strips. I just wanted to get that rough edge off of this strip before I started. And what I'm doing here is I determined that if you go to the 3/4 inch mark and then back off just a tish, whatever that is, just a tiny, tiny bit, and that is about the perfect width for using behind the starbursts or the peppermint twists. So I'll cut 3 like that in red, which again is habanero, and then I'm going to cut 3 more in green in bonsai. These are very nice little cardstocks. They are 80 pound and both of them are from the same line. They have exactly the same pattern, which is very light on one side but is still there. And you want to pay attention to that if you have cardstock with some kind of pattern on it. On this particular cardstock, it is smooth on one side and has that grain in it on the other. So you could choose to use this either way. If you're needing a project with the smooth side, you can do that. In this case, I am applying the glue around diagonal strips of the little stars, and I'm going to alternate this red, green, red, green, red, green, and do the same on the other side. And then I'll trim off the excess from the edges, and by the time I'm complete, I will have a very nice little stripy effect of green and red on the front. And these are the colors that will peek through. So this is kind of why that white that was seen before between the foam and the white glitter cardstock, that sort of disappears completely once you put the color behind it. The eye just can't pick up that there's white in the way, I guess. So it turns out that it was really not a big deal at all. So as you can see here, I'm trimming it off just like I said, and using excess pieces to fill in, and that's why you only need 3 strips of each. So now you can see the finished panel ready to decorate. And so now it's time to set that aside and start working on my reindeer image. It's so cute, all those stacked cute little baby reindeer. It's like they're reindeer in training, and they just kind of got out of control, and they're all stacked up on top of each other because they're playing around and goofing off. I love them. They're very, very cute. Since I am going to be coloring this using alcohol ink markers, I'm going to use my Memento Tuxedo Black ink. And this is a pretty tall shape, but it's very thin. And so I like that dewdrop shape instead of using my great big regular sized pad when I have a smaller image like this. I'm also going to use my Stamp Pendable paddle here. This is from LDRS, and it really helps to get a good image. To illustrate what I mean, I only stamped this image once and I was happy with it. I didn't have to re-stamp it twice or 3 times. And now I'll show you how I colored up this image. Don't worry about the colors, I will have that in my blog post. And so I hope you'll just sit back, relax, and enjoy the music and the coloring. That was fun. This little image after I cut it out is super, and it's going to look great on our card. And it looks very similar, of course, to the first one. And as usual, I kind of like my second version better than my first, just because you've had a chance to color that image already and you've learned a few things. So now I'm going to set that aside and go back to working on some decorations for the front of the card. So what I have here are 2 foam peppermint twists or stars, and I've got 2 of the cuts, identical cuts from the cardstock. These were left over when I cut the cardstock with the cover plate and from the foam. So just a few drops of glue on the foam will allow the cardstock to stick on it. I'm just going to press that down a little bit just to make sure. And then you see I've got two little candies. These are clay polymer candies, one in red and one in green. And I'm going to put one in each of the centers of the Peppermint Twist stars. So with that done, I'm going to set these aside to dry while I work on my sentiment for the card. So I'm going to set those aside. Here comes my red cardstock. I'm going to use this for the sentiment, but before I can do anything with it, I need to put some non-static dust on it. And then I'm going to place the sentiment that comes with the reindeer set. And we'll put that on here. Put it in place, and then I'll go ahead and use Versamark ink. And I always give 2 coats of Versamark to something I'm going to heat emboss, just to make sure it's got a good coating of the embossing ink on it. Next comes the embossing powder, and then I will apply some heat to that to melt it. I always like to let you guys know that embossing powder is actually just fine grains of plastic. I always wondered what it was. I learned that a while back. And I always like to share it with people because maybe everybody else knows that, but I didn't know. I had no idea what this stuff is made out of, but it is very finely ground plastic. So that's why it melts easily as well under the heat gun. So I'm going to use this hexagon set. This is the second and third from the smallest size hexagons in the Art Impression set. The second one from the middle is what I'm using for the actual sentiment, and then I'm cutting another slightly larger in the green. And I like these because of the shape, but also because it does have the stitching in the cut, so it has a nice finished look. And there's just a quick look at what the set looks like. So now I'm ready to go ahead and glue this down. Now sometimes I would put maybe this red on some foam tape, but because the actual card itself is so thick, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to add 1 layer of thickness though, but not with the sentiment itself. I'm going to use another layer of double-sided foam tape on the reindeer themselves to make them stand up just a little bit more, and I've got that already on there. And then I'm just going to glue directly the sentiment, and I'm going to like nest the sentiment with the reindeer. I'm just going to put the reindeer slightly off to the side and then position my sentiment where I want it to be in relation to them, and then press it all down into place. I'm almost ready to add those 2 little peppermint candies we worked on a second ago. I'm going to put them here, but in order to provide support for them, I'm just going to slip in 2 of those stars in place in the hole. These have quite a tight compression fit, so I'm not bothering to put any glue behind there, but you certainly could if you wanted to. Once those are in place, I'll add some more glue and place those stars with the little polymer clay centers on top. And this of course creates more height, but remember that the reindeer were also on foam tape, so the reindeer and these peppermint twist pieces are about the same height. And that will complete the card front. Now we can attach it to our card base. So for this card base, I made an A2 size folded at the top. My other example was folded on the left, so I just have a slightly different way of doing it. I thought it'd be fun to show both. And then I'm going to just put some wet glue on the back of my finished panel. And that then will go on top of the A2 card base. And this is really easy to do when they're both the same size. You can just use your tabletop and your fingers to position everything. I want to sincerely thank all of you for spending some time here with me. I hope I gave you some tips and tricks and ideas with what to do with any of the cover plate dies you may have at home. I also recommend checking out the full shopping list of all the items used in this card. It can be found in the video description. So take care everybody, and I'll be back soon with another video. Bye-bye.